Hi, welcome to class. We're the only two right now, but the other ones will show up eventually, right? I hate my life. I hate my life. And Professor Sunrise Productions! Hello class, Professor Sunrise here. In today's class we're gonna take a look at Dragon Link's position in the post-Dune meta. For this we'll be taking a look at the new stuff which we can play post-Dune. We'll be gonna take a look at all of the non-engine people are playing and how the general non-engine composition of a deck is gonna change. And then finally, we're going to take a look at all of the, at least for now, meta matchups, which you should expect to see at like a regional event. And we're going to just talk about them, how good they are, how bad they are. And then finally, we're going to conclude and see how good ranks are in the current meta. So without further ado, don't forget to like and subscribe. Seal pass on that subscribe button as always. And let's get right into the video. So let's take a look at Dragon's current standing in the meta. We will get to take a look at new cards, current non-engine and meta matchups, of course. So for the new cards, we have only really Meteor Black Dragon, which makes Black Metal a way better extender or a starter. We also already talked about that in another video, which I will be linking here if I can do that now, I don't know. But it does need an extra break and overall plays less good into the current non-engine. So for now, I don't think it's a very good addition in a more board breaker centric format with a lot of, like last format, basically no drolls or like little drolls and a lot of board breakers. I can see this being a way better card, but for now it's not really that good, for at least for the current meta, because of all of the non-engine people are playing. Speaking about non-engine, Droll is gonna be in every main deck probably for the foreseeable future, just because it hits basically all of the meta decks right now. Some of them really hard against some of the more niche combo decks. It's the only thing which can help you win the game at all if they win the die roll or if they go first. Also, there's probably gonna be less books to play into going second, as a lot of decks are required to play that role. Books become less good in general because Kashtira is gonna take a slight dent in popularity, though Purely also gets hit by books a little bit, so books could still be, they will still 100% be around, but in my opinion there will be less books, because in the last format, if there was a set card, it's like 99% of the time was a book. Right now, there might be less, there might be an imperm, there might be something else, but there's still gonna probably be books, but just less so, which is good for us, because books are kind of annoying against our normal summon when going second, but now it's a lot more manageable, at least I hope so. And then lastly, there's probably gonna be less evenly / Dark Ruler type board breakers and more low impact hand traps. Think of imperms, think of veilers, think of ashes. All of those will probably be more relevant, and then Evenly is probably gonna take a bigger hit out of the format, and Dark Ruler is probably gonna be more in the side deck and less so in the main deck right now, compared to where it was last format, where everyone had Dark Ruler in the main deck just because it was so good against all of those runic life trend decks. It wasn't a Rise Heart out, all of that. Probably still very decent in the side deck, but not so much main deck worthy right now. And with that, let's take a look at all of the matchups which you probably will have to face at a regional level and see how good they are. And of course, the first thing, Kashtira, is still the hardest matchup. Probably still the best deck or the second best deck, so you probably will have to play still against a decent amount of it, probably less so than in the last format, especially near the end. There was, like at the start of the format, people weren't so hard on cash, but then near the end, near Euros national season, there was a lot of Kashtira. Probably gonna be less so than right now, because Purely is like super good right now, but it's still gonna be a lot of things, and Shifter is still a thing, like so many other decks. Shifter, like if they can play Shifter somewhat, they probably will play Shifter in the side deck, just because it's similar to Draw, like one of the few hand traps which really hurts those heavy combo decks like Synchron Piles or like Infernoble, I believe. So yeah, Kashtira is still a hard matchup, still probably the hardest matchup for us. Next to that is Purely. Both of our decks, so Dragon Link and Purely, have towers the other ones cannot out whatsoever with their engine. I mean, you can theoretically play Access Code and then force out the Noir, or you have different ways to force out a Noir, otherwise you will get to a towers, and that way you can at least make some of your outs alive against it. Other than that, there's really no way to just out the towers with only engine. They play way more non-engine than us, so if it comes to a tower v tower war, it's probably they are gonna win it, just because they have more non-engine outs and they can probably draw like 2 to 3 cards every standby phase. So you cannot really sit on just the tower for more than like 1 or 2 turns maybe. But on a good note, our first turn board is pretty good against them. They have a very hard time dealing with like 2 to 3 spot removals, even though if they have their field spell, our Branded Beast / Truce from Disruption isn't alive against them, but you always have a Savage to negate the field spell. or you can use Branded Beast on the field spell and then use the Druid's Worm on the monster which you want to get rid of. So there's still ways to play around that, and Seal is just an insane card against them. And we are one of the few decks which can actually out an Xyz monster, let them have 3 cards in their hand again, like 3 quick spells of the My Friend, and then still be able to outgrind them just because our disruption is so good against them. Targeting or non-targeting removal against them is really solid, and then you have the regain plus the seal loop to just keep on getting resources and keep on removing those bodies. So we are one of the few decks which can actually outgrind them, and overall I would say the matchup is like a 50-50. I have very good local players on my locals which play the deck, and if I lose the die roll, I'll usually lose the game or the match. If I win the die roll, I'll usually win the match, just because going first is so much easier against them than it is going second. To be fair, I was very underprepared for them because it was in the last format that didn't have Kurikaras, it didn't play any Kaijus, but now I'm playing them and maybe the matchups will become a lot more easier, especially losing the die roll. Maybe you can do something against them now, but in my opinion, this is probably one of the 50-50 matchups, and it's very die roll dependent, or like maybe luck dependent if you hard draw that out against them, or if they break, or if the draw really hurts them and then you just OTK them, stuff like that. But overall, it's probably a 50-50. Then we have Manadium. I think it's called with 2N. Anyways, it's spelled with 2N. Bystials are super broken here. I think the standard 2-card combo just dies to 1 Bystial, and you cannot extend off just those 2 cards in this combo, because hitting the Visa Starfrost in the graveyard prevents them from getting a free level 8 on the board. With the not Triad, what's it called? The fusion guy, you know what I'm up. And it also prevents them from reviving probably a level 2 tuner of the Cross Sheep, so they commit quite a bit of resources into the Cross Sheep, so at least like 2 bodies. I probably did some plays before that, and then you just Bystial away that one thing, and then suddenly the Bystial basically traded with a Synchro 10, which is insane. So Bystials are really good against them. It basically makes it so that instead of playing like 9 to 10 non-engine slots, we suddenly play like 17 non-engine slots against that deck, just because Bystials are so good against them. They only play a medium amount of non-engine themselves, so it's hard for them to punish a Droll with the Droll meta, because a lot of times in this format it will be that you will be trading Droll, similar to in the OCG, where you have to just play the Maxi minigame, and you just have to have a good amount of non-engine or ways to punish the opponent if they maxi you, so that you can maxi you themselves and they have to pass the turn and then you can play, or you have the Ash against the maxi, you know it. So in this meta, you want to have a Droll or any other non-engine to stop the opponent's Droll or non-engine from completely blowing you out. Turn down that ceiling of the engine you have, and then just put a lot of more value into the non-engine you have. And if you get Drolled, you can just freely draw them yourself or use the other non-engine to stop the opponents, and then you hopefully have some follow-up, and then in the turn 3 in the crackback you can just hopefully overwhelm them with the advantage. And in a format like that, I think we just win against Manadium because we have a way more non-engine than they have. Our Bystials are super strong. We play way better against Droll than they do, because we can realistically end on Seal plus Branded Beast or Savage against a Droll a lot of times, just because the way our deck works. And if we draw them, they probably don't have as many resources against us. So overall, I would say this is a very favorite matchup for us, like a 60-40 or like 75-25, just because Bystials are so good. We play way more non-engine and we play better under Droll than they do. Other good matchups include, because it's very hard for me to know what the current meta is, but I feel like Kashtira, Manadium, and Purely are like the hottest decks right now. Other good matchups include Marincess, just because spot removal is really good against them. Them being on a towers game plan is really bad for them right now, though they play really good into Droll. A lot of people are trying to beat towers anyway. With Purely being the format, Marincess just gets hit on the sidelines by that, so that's less good for them, but still a very good deck just because it plays so well into Droll. And it can play shit ton of non-engine, and even if you get Kaiju'd or like your towers get outed, they still have to kill you, because the follow-up this deck can amass is insane. And then we have Branded, of course, still a very good matchup for us, because Bystials are insane against them, though lots of our non-engine is not really tailored against them anymore. Droll doesn't really hit them. The books I still keep on playing doesn't really hit them, but still I think it's a good format matchup, just because Branded is not that hard of a deck to beat for this deck. Then we have Labyrinth. Also still a very good matchup for us, just because we can actually grind with them. Though, of course, our non-engine is, as always, kind of bad against them post-side. We can make it salvage, and I always try to have a live side-decking pattern against Labyrinth, so that a post-side can take all of that non-engine, and then just have something which is at least alive against them, and that definitely helps. But still, I think the matchup is pretty favored. And then we have all of the sprite variants, and I speak about like Melfi sprite variants. So aggressive sprite variants which try to not play Runic and just try to go for like a very similar to Marinces or like Sword Soul, I should even say, like a kind of aggro vibe where you have like a very consistent engine which gets you lots of tempo on the board, but it doesn't really have lots of follow-up, but then you also have a shit ton of non-engine so that you can just steamroll your opponents a lot of time. Against those sprite variants, we are very good just because we have Seal, we have Branded Beast, and that usually completely stops them. Then let's take a look at some not so great matchup of 50-50 matchups. Here we have Rika, which is probably a 50-50 matchup just because their end board is really, really good, but they can't really play through a Branded Beast Seal just because if we hit their Loci, like we pop the Loci, and they don't have the unexpected die or the Princess, Rika Princess, yes, they cannot really extend off that. And we have usually 2 spot removals, so even if they have that 1 extender, if we still have the 2nd spot removal, they still cannot play Infernoble. They don't play any Dark, so Bystials are not really alive against them. They are like a pretty heavy combo deck, but though they die to probably 1 Dark Ruler just because they don't really have a lot of back row disruption or like graveyard disruption, it's still a very dangerous deck. I would probably still say it's like a 50-50 because I don't think the deck can realistically play into our board all too crazy. It doesn't really play a lot of non-engine, and spot removal still should be pretty good against them as well, just because they try to get into that Isolde. They can't get into Isolde against like Branded Beast plus Dru's Worm. It makes it really hard for them, so probably also 50-50. Then we have Runic variants. They're not great matchups. Runic cards are pretty good against us, but usually all of the other sub-engines people are playing, we are good against those, and if we can mitigate those, we are probably in a good spot to dealing with the Runics as well. Runic, I'd say, is a 50-50 against all of the other engines people are playing. We are favored, so I would put this as like a 60-40 maybe. So it's definitely not a great matchup, but it's definitely not a bad matchup like the last one. And you also have to take into consideration that Runic just really gets hit by the current format quite hard, because right now you want to have a lot of non-engine to deal with the opponent's non-engine, and Runic decks in general are like very mid-range heavy, and they can't really play a lot of non-engine. First of all, they die to Droll. Like, Droll hits them really, really hard, and they can't really have a realistic amount of non-engine because they have to draw so many Runic cards to counter the opponent's Droll. Usually Runic variants had like 6 to like 7 non-engine slot maximum, as like, at least the Runic Lifetime variants. I don't know if the Runic Furhire variants played more, but usually you want the Runic cards to be the non-engine. But if you use the Runic cards to get your engine rolling, and then you get hit by a Droll and you can't refill your hands with Runics, suddenly you use all of your non-engine to use as engine, and then you get hit by a Droll and cannot really use your engine anymore, and suddenly you're left with no non-engine. Of course, if Droll is in the format, you can work around that and maybe build the deck a little differently, but right now, Runics are probably gonna take a step back once we are more in a mid-range format again, and then suddenly they will be better, but even then, we're still like decently favored against them, I'd say. And then lastly, we have Flunder. Awful matchup, I hate it. They play Shifter. Empen is super hard for us to out because we cannot use half of our extra deck because they're all links. And then you still have the very good spot removal they have with the trap, like booking probably 2 monsters of us, because they probably will use it if they're smart on our first Synchro Summon play. So if you have 2 to 3 bodies on the board, they will use that trap, and we cannot really play again. Also, it's super hard to hit them with our non-engine because they require somewhat unique non-engine hits to be able to hit them effectively. And even then, they can still have that annoying trap to just skill drain you out of the game, or they can just have Shifter, or even if you draw them, they Shifter you. So overall, awful matchup. I hate it. I don't really want to play against it, but it's probably not going to be as popular, just like right now, like a very decent roguish option, but you still should have it on your radar. Conclusion, the white format is a little annoying, but it's probably not too crazy. Droll can be worked around quite effectively because our engine can go from full-on combo to very control-heavy seal pass, depending on what we need. So we are like a very adaptable deck, which is really good in a format like this, especially early on in the format if you're not quite sure what you want to do and you expect to get hit by Droll a lot, and suddenly you don't get hit by Droll, we can still pop off and combo quite hard. And more importantly, while the format is kind of wide and that can be a little annoying, Cash and Purely are probably going to be the decks to beat, and we have a very similar game plan against them. We both want to have books against them because most of their setups get hit by a book quite hard. And more importantly, our whole non-engines which we have in the side deck can be put against both them quite effectively. Right now, I'm on a Kurikawa package and on a Thrust package. And both of those things work really well against set decks. So while the format is kind of wide, probably the most decks which we want to beat, at least purely, and our hardest matchup in cash, so we probably have to, no matter what, prepare for those decks the most. We can beat them with the same cards, so that saves us lots of space for other cards, which makes the format a little less wide, at least from our own perspective. So that's, in my opinion, pretty good. And overall, I would rate this format the thumbs up for Dragon Link. It is fine. Last format had more cash, but also way more easy matchups with a lot of live twin variants, which we could punish with the Bystials. A lot more branded, a lot more Labyrinth. Right now, we're probably more on purely and cash, and maybe some Manadium and some other random combo decks. And while we are good against purely, or not as bad against purely as we are against cash, we are not nearly as good against all of the other random decks than we have been in the last format, but I still would say Dragons are in a very decent spot right now. It's still a very, very strong deck, and the engine itself can just win games just because it's so strong and so resource loop heavy. Overall, the format is still going to be fine, and playing Dragons will be super fine, even with Draw in the format, if you play around it accordingly. So, hope you guys enjoyed today's class. Class is dismissed. You guys are free to leave. Professor Sunrise out. Peace.